As expected, President Trump issued a whole slew of pardons and commutations on his last full day in office. Let's go ahead and throw this up on the screen. 143 people. It is a wide-ranging list, including rapper Lil Wayne, former Detroit Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick, and also the one and only Steve Bannon saga.
Wow, yeah, some real inspiring stuff there. So joining us now to discuss Michael Starr Hopkins, he's Democratic strategist, founding partner of Northern Star Strategies, and Marshall Kosloff, he's co-host of the Realignment podcast. Marshall, let me start with you. There's a special cherry on top ending here for one of the last official acts of Trump to be both pardoning Steve Bannon for defrauding his supporters around raising money for a border wall and then paying himself exorbitant sums of money, but also his last official act revoking the order, disallowing his people in his administration in order to lobby for the next 5 years, meaning that they can begin immediately lobbying on day one. Your reaction to all of this?
Yeah, we were joking before. It's weird how Trump uses his standard of loyalty in different contexts. So Mike Pence, January 6th, let's throw that out. But Steve Bannon, despite 2 or 3 years of this weird love-hate relationship, and then the lobbying thing is just a perfect example of that. There's no rhyme. There's no real reason. There's no real strategic move there. I mean, I'm not quite sure who exactly is going to be lobbying particularly effectively at this point. So it's a real grab bag.
Yeah, exactly. Who in that group has real great access into the Biden administration or the democratically controlled House or Senate is a very good point, Marshall. I mean, Michael, it really is like a who's who. There are some low-level drug offenders here and people who deserve to have their sentences commuted or pardons. But it really is like a who's who list of sort of corrupt public officials and white-collar criminals, perfectly emblematic of the just brazen level of corruption that's been endemic to the entire Trump era.
Yeah, and it's the perfect example of why Trump's populism is nothing more than faux populism. For all his talk about average Americans and wanting to help average Americans, it was really tax cuts for the rich and pardons for his friends. He was allowing and empowering people who purely were making profits off the American people. And so it's the perfect final chapter to what was a gross and disgusting presidency.
So what's interesting to me, Marshall, is Trump apparently seems to think he needs Steve Bannon, as in he needs support from him, in the future, or maybe possibly as an advisor and more. We had Ryan Gerdusky on the show joking yesterday about how Steve Bannon was basically sacrificing all of his indignity by sucking up to Ivanka Trump, trying to get that pardon, which did materialize. So I hope that it worked. But here's the honest question. What does he actually get from Steve Bannon's support in the year 2021?
This is the weird thing. And Steve Bannon's always had a complicated relationship with how much of President Trump coming back from the real August low in 2016 was Steve Bannon coming on, how much of that was decisions that Hillary made, James Comey made, etc. We're never going to know the exact answer to the question, but here's what I think Steve Bannon definitely gives for Trump. He gives Trump a coherent narrative. The one thing that has been absent after Bannon left the White House was any sort of coherent narrative for how this administration approached the world, for what unified Trump. I mean, Michael, you got to this with your last answer. There's a contradiction of populism with pardoning of corrupt public officials and other wealthy people. That's what happens when an administration doesn't have a narrative. They don't have an actual organizing principle. So the one thing that Steve Bannon could do, if Trump hypothetically could develop the discipline over the next 2 or 3 years, no one's betting on that here, I'm sure, is provide a narrative that could actually center things and make things actually make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually interesting to imagine how Trump's presidency might have been different had he kept Steve Bannon as an advisor the entire time, because, I find him to be, he's a loathsome, corrupt person, and a lot of what he stands for I find to be abhorrent. But he was the person who sort of stitched together what that Trumpian populism actually was on a sort of policy and philosophical footing. Michael, the other piece of this is there was a lot of reporting that Trump may pardon himself preemptively, that he may pardon his children preemptively, that he might pardon like his aides and advisors and Republican members of Congress preemptively. He decided against doing any of that particular direction. Why do you think that ultimately he shied away from going that far?
You know, I will say we still have a couple hours left for him to do it, so I put nothing past him. But, I think his advisors got to him and explained that if he were to pardon himself or pardon his family, it's almost daring the Justice Department or other organizations to indict him. And so the threat of doing it would beget charges. And I think that's really at the crux of why he didn't do it. I also, going back to the Bannon point, Bannon has always managed to find his way into interesting funds, whether it be the Mercers, whether it be some of the Chinese money. I don't write Trump off when it comes to finding new ways of getting money, given some of his proclivities and some of the issues he's going to deal with mainstream banks.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see all of that. It's a good segue, actually, to our next segment talking about impeachment. So stick with us, guys, and we'll be back with more Rising right after this.